Welcome, folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions. It's Thursday, February 20th. We are working on House Bill 50, which pertains to doing a report back, really, about what state lands that are owned that might be able to be utilized for converting over to affordable housing. And we have with us BGS as well as Human Resources. Commissioner of Human Resources, because I think there was interest in discussing the use of some of our state-owned buildings, office buildings, to kind of get a feel for how many of them may be underutilized at this point, or what the plan is. So Commissioner Manoli, are you coming up, Wanda? No, you're not. The smile on her face. Welcome.
Welcome, and thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Wanda Manoli, Commissioner of Buildings and General Services. And I am glad that you asked me to come in and talk to you about H50. One of the things that I just want to share with the committee is my style when bills are proposed and I read them. And I think the chair has had this experience with me in the past. While I'm the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, I always take your proposal seriously. And part of my process is to read it and interpret it and try to put it in place to what our function and our operations are. And I look at the language from that perspective first to say, does it make sense? Does it align? Do we already do this? So today, part of my testimony is to talk about what we do currently. And then for you to, because I will just say in general, I believe we have the information available that you're looking for. And I think that will broaden the discussion in this committee of what are you really trying to accomplish in some of those goals. So I'm not sitting here saying I am opposed. I'm saying I believe that it exists and that the information is already available there for the legislators to look at the data and try to determine what is available. So with that, I'd like to continue. I apologize. I did bring what I'm going to be referring to as our space book. I brought copies for those of the members who did not want to go online and download it. I would love to autograph one for Representative Casey. So,
To be honest.
I reviewed this. So with that, if I my comments and I'm going to continue. So do we have the slide up? So the current bill, as I see it, is amending Title 29, which is the duties of the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, and requiring that I issue a report, do a study and issue a report to the General Assembly on the state's real property, including underutilized lots in population centers, and is suitable for conversion into affordable housing. So what I'm going to tell you is we do this already. And it is broken down by every community, every town. The question of conversion into affordable housing is not a part of the space book. So if we go to the next slide.
Let me just be clear what you currently do. You currently have an inventory of BGS owned property, real property.
Mhm.
But it does not include if it's suitable for conversion to housing.
Well, and
Right.
I think we should talk about that.
Right.
If we could talk about that. So the next slide, I'm highlighting because I think this is really important. Current law, space allocation inventory, use, leasing property, is all required with the pre-approval of the commissioner. But what you direct me now is to implement all reasonable and necessary measures to utilize all available state space in state-owned buildings and structures. And the reason and the purpose of that language is really about privately owned lease space is generally more costly, as I think you'll remember, than it is for us to own and operate our space. And part of our processes, without getting into all of the details on how we do this, when we get a request from a department to downsize or to increase, or there's a new program, we're required to look at our existing space today. So that's our inventory. That's our property that we move in between and out of and try to make the best decisions on behalf of the state. And then it says the state shall maintain an inventory of all state owned buildings and compile and update this information. This is the space book, and I've got a couple more copies if someone wants them. If we could pass that, and I can just leave these here. So we do this every June. This book is put together, and I'm going to just highlight, actually, if we go to the next slide, if we could go to the next slide, thank you. This is in the beginning, but this is our overview. This is where, when we talk about data, we have 234 buildings, 4.1 million of gross usable square footage, 3 million of rentable. So that means of what we actually charge in fee for space and how we assign that space to departments. And currently we have 263,000 square feet of vacant space. Now I know you're all going, oh, where is that? Well, we have to go through the report, and that's where I say, well, that's the Zampier building is one of those buildings. We have vacant buildings currently on State Street because of the flood. So it's an accumulation, and in this report, those spaces are identified. What I also think is really important just for today, you can look at the history. And you can see that our utilization of space of what we currently have under my jurisdiction is still occupied. There has not been, there's a small decrease after 2016. But otherwise we've been pretty stable with that. Now, is space used differently today than what we've been accustomed to Monday through Friday, 7:45 to 4:30? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it's just all vacant and not being utilized. It's being utilized differently. And every program and service, depending on what they're providing to Vermonters, has to align with how they use their space. So I just, that's just in general. I really want to get into the details, and I'm trying not to at this point. But
I do want to interrupt here. So I'm just looking at language in G. So this just pertains to the head of each agency.
Mhm.
Well, that's your secretary of the agencies, right? It's not your departments, it's the agencies, or it could be.
Well, it's the departments would be under them.
Shall prepare and forward to you.
Yep.
When you requested inventory of square footage that's available, square footage in actual use, and square footage not use, and square footage for storage, blah, blah, blah. Those are all buildings that are under the jurisdiction of BGS.
Well, one of the things, so Madam Chair, I did notice, and I have asked my team, the document has changed a little bit. I remember we used to collect the information from ANR and AOT. That has been, it's the form prescribed by the commissioner, and that we don't have some of those land holdings in this book. And that is something that I saw that changed. And I've been in discussions with my director of property management saying, maybe we should have this section, maybe we should bring it back. So we identify the form and the information we want to collect for this book. So AOT's garages, for example, are not in this book. They used to be.
It's just BGS's.
It's just BGSs and so, but Matt, so we used to collect it. We stopped collecting it.
Which is broader than.
Then what is what the current practice has been? Thank you, Madam Chair.
That's what I'm wondering. I mean, that language indicates to me is
Yeah.
broader than what you're gonna find in here.
That is correct. You're absolutely right. So, and there was a shift in it and my point in talking to you today is to say, I think in the intent or some of the information that you're looking for in H50 and codifying my authorities, we already do. We already have this. So back to what are you trying to accomplish? And that's what I'm trying to demonstrate in this. So, and the one thing about the, and so there's some great information in this book. And I will tell you, just for those of you that want to take a moment and you go to near the end of the book, and you look at our land holdings. When you see the land holdings, and I don't have this on the slide, but I'll leave this. When we break it down by each town, you actually see the buildings and the acreage there. And when you look at what our land holdings are, it's actually not, we have a lot of square footage. We don't have a lot of acreage. We have 1,731 acres of land. And then that includes our correctional facilities, that includes our court buildings, that includes all of those properties. So again, looking at this language from what are we trying to do and trying to understand what we do. Then I go to, if you can go to the next slide. So then I looked at your language and it says popular center, like population center. So I'm sitting there going, oh, wonder what they're thinking about that, right? So I said, okay, population center must be the census report. That's just where I went because it wasn't clear to me. And so I thought this was helpful for you if you're going to identify such a report, and this is something important. What is the most populous area? So I give you the top 20 based on the 2020 census report. And I don't know if that's what you want me to use or not, but and then I will tell you, and I did not do this for my presentation. I went to our Spacebook and I started looking at this going, there's nothing. There's not a whole lot available to you. So if that's what you want me to do, I don't think we have to codify it. I think we could look at how do we incorporate something like that into the report. But you need to define, is it the top 10? Is it the top 15? Is it the top 20? Is it the whole state? Because when you go to the Spacebook and you go to that back section, we've just given you the whole state. So in part, I'm trying to really identify that. And any questions so far, or do you want me to go to my last slide? And then my last slide is the authority currently for selling and renting state-owned property. And I'm pointing this out, and I know you know this, but our process today is I determine there's buildings that we need to sell. We may have done a study on something else, working with this committee and other committees, and we come back and we ask specific language to sell a building. The statute already says that I have to advertise, I have to go out to bid, and it has to be to the highest. You're the entity that sets guardrails around those sales. And I think that we have worked well with some communities on some of those guardrails. I think there's an example is you put in language for the sale of Williston, that Williston has the first option. In Waterbury, the sale of Stanley and Wasson, you didn't give it for a lesser amount. You gave authority to the commissioner to work with the community for them to have first option. So you're putting those guardrails around that now. So we bring forth to you and we present to you, we don't need this property any longer. And we'd like authority to sell it. And that's where it becomes, I think, a more cohesive planning and discussion around that. And, when we talk about affordable housing, I just, I think all of you know this from your own communities and your own business. It's about the market. Is it viable? And it's finding a developer who's willing to finance it. So we have property for sale today. Nobody is offering to buy it. And so I'm not sure, again, I think when you look at that policy and what you're trying to accomplish, I want to be a partnership with you, but I think it needs to make sense.
Questions?
Yeah, I wonder if I should take a step back here, right?
Take a step back. Step back. Sorry.
Because first, I think maybe point taken, maybe this bill puts a little bit too much on the BGS commissioner. And also, I think that a lot of the work that this bill had hoped to compile already exists, right, in the space book and with some of the mapping that we saw with AOT.
Yeah.
So then it's a question, what's the end game, right? What's the end game here? And the end game to me is in the governor's inaugural address. We need 8,000 housing units built a year to get on track here. And I think if we do that, everything has to be on the table, including state land. I find it kind of strange that we give, tens of millions of dollars to, Housing and Conservation Board, the Land Trust, giving them direction to find land that's suitable to convert into affordable housing or any other types of housing. But, we seem somewhat territorial, and we've had some of these conversations the last couple of years here when it comes to our own building space and land here. So what I look at is our neighbors in Barry here. And this is some creative thinking, I think, to put a dent in this housing crisis. Barry owns 2 lots. These lots aren't doing much good for the city just sitting there, Sure, you could put it on the market, you might get a bit, but, put that next to having a tax base, having people move in, energizing the downtown area of Barry there. And to me, let's cut the middleman to some extent. And if we could do an analysis and even just say, and collectively, let's take putting it on you, Commissioner, at the moment. Collectively, maybe it's another committee or something. We've identified 25 pieces of land, parcels, that are close to a population center. We got to better define that. Maybe 10 miles, 20 miles. You don't want to put it in the middle of nowhere in Braintree, maybe, But maybe you do want it like 5 miles outside. Randolph, that probably is Braintree, but anyways, I think that's the kind of thing. And then collectively looking and taking these 25, again, I'm just throwing out a number there, 25 state-owned parcels. Maybe they're buildings we don't need anymore. Maybe it's a parking lot. Maybe it's a piece of land. And say, all right, developers, here's the framework here. We want affordable housing. We want to build within a time period. This is the population we want it to serve. This is the type of neighborhood we're looking. Have at it. Let's have some bids on that. And you know what? If it's good, maybe we give it to you for $1 or something. And I think if we, again, everything has to be on the table to solve this housing crisis. Everybody in this building ran on it. It's all we talk about all the time. And I think state land has to be part of that equation. So this is a mechanism to start getting there, but the language is a concept. And I think smarter people than me can help figure out a process to actually make this a reality, and maybe unloading some of this land. And maybe there's not as much as we thought, but let people know Vermont's open for business here. Let's start building.
It may not be land under BGS jurisdiction.
And it might not. In fact, it's looking like AOT might be a player in this. Yeah.
AOT.
I believe, and I have to confirm, I'm not sure what authority AOT has to sell. I'm not sure if that would have to fall under 160, 166, but that's something you should confer with your attorney. Which again, that's your, those are your guardrails, right? You say you go out and you get the best price and you publicly advertise. There's nothing, and I think that BGS has proven, at least with this committee and its record, that if someone comes to us if we don't get any options and someone comes back to us with a better idea, I think those have been presented to this committee over years and you all have supported it. And I think those are the guardrails and where those conversations occur. And then and I think you have to be careful, this is the commissioner speaking, that just generally just looking at stats and saying that's vacant or whatever. You know, there is, depending on what's going on, and I will use Montpelier. I know people are looking around Montpelier and they say, gosh, we have empty space over here, we have parking lots. We're in the process on behalf of the state, in the best interest of the state, working through our FEMA application. And there can be no commitment. You know, we're trying to meet our flood mitigation. We're trying to get the best dollars for, for the state back. And, what I can tell you is part of that is a utilization. And for me, looking at the utilization of space and what does that mean if I can't use a building, if I'm just, if it's determined that it's just not going to be able to be used for whatever, or we need to remove a piece of property. For example, maybe the storage shed or the work shed for BGS out in the parking lot, because we need to make room for future flooding. All of that's going on. So it's really hard now. And I just want to ask for patience, I think, and time from the committee that you allow us to, to complete that. Because if we're juggling two, I've got to do we have to do what's in the best interest of the state, city of Montpelier, and flooding and future flooding. So.
I think what's happening here in the Capitol complex, I know what your angle is, Connor, but I think some of us have worked with FEMA in the past, and I understand what the commissioner is saying. We have to work through the process here in the Capitol complex to really figure out where we're going to be at the end. So I'd sort of like to separate that issue from the real issue is there state lands that are out there, and maybe the focus was starting with BGS, and that's a policy decision we're going to have to make if we just continue working on this bill. Do we expand it beyond BGS, maybe not even include BGS? I mean, I'm going through my notes for AOT, and they say if there's no public need in terms of transportation use, then they could sell it, and they sell it at fair market value.
Okay. And
then the proceeds from that sale go back to the T fund. They also said that they have a certain level where they can sell their property without legislative authority for that. So maybe we're looking in the wrong place.
could I have that authority? I'm just kidding.
You get too much authority.
Maybe. Who said that?
I don't agree with it.
James.
I know.
So maybe we as a committee, if we continue working on this, so it'll be up to the committee to decide this, where else do we look? Do we do more work with AOT to really figure it out? Do we work with A&R? Because A&R may have some pieces of property that they're willing to say, hey, this is near a population center, whatever, however you define that. It could be suitable for housing, however you define suitable. Maybe we're looking at the wrong place to begin with. Just putting that out on the table for thought. Tyler?
I'm thinking that it's a great idea to utilize what we have that's underutilized. Wouldn't it be helpful to though brainstorm what kind of an offer you're gonna make to these contractors to speculate? So they say, oh yeah, I'll buy it for $1. But what are you gonna expect in return? And then you've got a framework for them to think about the opportunity. Without those words in place, the Sweeneys of the world aren't just looking to buy property. Well, they want to know they're going to be able to make money. So if you're going to tell them can't charge more than thus and so for affordable housing, and you can only go 16 stories up or whatever, that needs to be defined before. I would think that would be work we need to do to figure out whether you even got a market out there.
I think it's a wise approach, Kevin, and maybe starting where you want to end up,
Yeah.
going backwards, right? Whereas this bill, I think, started at
Yeah.
the beginning,
Yeah.
not totally seeing beyond the clouds of what's at the end there. But I think the concept still stands.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the list at the back of your huge space report,
Yes,
and there's very little land. Oh, and the utilization report indicates that there's very little vacant space.
right.
So,
And one thing to the committee, I'll say, and I jumped around a little bit in my last statement. One of utilization analysis is part of our business. And I'm doing that and I'm working with my team. So I used, that's how I sort of got on Montpelier while we're looking at our flood responding to FEMA and the application that we're going through. What I know is at some point in time, I need to have a rebalance of the utilization of space. And that's going to be a part of that. And we're doing that. The space book, believe it or not, identifies occupancy in some sections, not all. I just want to say, but and so this is in the section that's identified as, give me a second. And they're not numbered. We're going to retab this book, but it's actually the first section.
Chair.
You go through and like you look at Barry, it actually gives you the occupancy number. It's not that occupancy is the wrong word. That's the actual design for individuals that are sitting there on a full-time equivalent basis. And so that's one of the data points that we're starting to align with some of our work with HR and just looking at, space and reuse. So I just showing that as a point, which is interesting. Because I was confused when I first read it as occupancy, but it's actually taking the usable, and if they have modular units, they're saying there's 100 there.
And Commissioner, and it seems like to me that the 8.6% that's available throughout all your buildings is actually that would, in my head, I'm thinking that's a comfortable number that you want to be at right now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that, so you do, we may have to reset some of those. I'm figuring that out, but I think that traditionally, yes. But then when you go to that number and you go to the back of the book, I think Zampier Building's currently included in that number, right? So that makes
that lowers that
numbers
number.
even lower.
Right.
Because
you want to get rid of that.
that's,
Right.
we're in the process of, as the direction of the legislature, we entered into an agreement that, we have a lot of agreements that are a little ways out as far as directing us to sell and or working with communities, but yeah.
Okay.
So I think that, is 5% the right number? I don't know, but I also think, to your point, and again, I'm new at this job. To your point that, and part of my responsibility is, what do I have for leases coming up that we're going to be expiring? Do they still need that space? Are they in the right location? Do I have another location where I can bring them in? That's my due diligence that I have to do at the department, the way you currently have everything laid out in statute.
So the book is beaming up Wanda.
This beaming up, want to know. Yes, because it's Space Odyssey,
Yes.
WLM 2025. Oh,
Yeah, Commissioner, is the space book available in sort of a searchable spreadsheet where you can sort by town and space?
You can in here.
The online, I have not tried to sort it that way. I think it's in a PDF, but let me go back to the team. They may have a spreadsheet that is just behind the curtain, right? Because, and if you're looking for some specific data runs from this, reach out to Emily and I, and we'll also see if we can do it for you. It might be quicker for us to do it.
And another question, Commissioner, I think it'd be helpful for me, like, so we just went through a process of trying to find a site for the new women's prison, you know? How many different sites did we look at in state government, and what are sort of the things that?
So I'm not exaggerating when I say this to you. I wasn't here, but my understanding is that between and I think we've presented this, it was under 250, but some of those were not all, some were state-owned, some were through the advertisement, what's available. And quickly you go through the criteria of your top criteria and you eliminate that. Was 250 or 150?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
A 160 to be
And-
exact.
And it quickly narrowed down and just, some of that land included AOT land, for instance. And so it was
Right.
helpful to us to have that as a potential.
Well, we're actually looking at trying to build on it.
Exactly, yeah, exactly, exactly, yeah.
Correct, correct.
But if you're gonna build housing, affordable housing on any state-owned land that we have, regardless under whose jurisdiction it is, that piece of property has to have water and sewer already to it. And be able to also have power to it. So, you know, you can't have it out in Timbuktu. Those are costs, if we already have state-owned property that is accessible to water and sewer, is accessible to it, along with power, that will help a developer more than anything. If it's property that is not near a hookup for water and sewer, developer, that just increases the cost of building that project. So that in itself is going to narrow down what would be available out there. So I'm looking at the time. We also have the Commissioner of Human Resources here. I don't know, Beth, if you want to weigh in on this at all.
Beth Bastici, Commissioner of Human Resources. I just heard that the committee wanted to talk about telework, so I could just provide you maybe 5 minutes on kind of the state of telework and our employees.
That would be great, because I know some committee members had the concern that folks aren't coming into the office to work, and that came as a result of seeing that we had vacant office space. And why are we keeping that available when people are working remotely? So Commissioner, if you could just identify yourself for the record.
Hello, I'm Beth Bastici. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Human Resources and happy to be in the Corrections and Institutions Committee, which I generally am not.
Well, you have been dealing with corrections things.
Yes, not this year.
No, not this year.
So I have just two kind of pieces of information I wanted to go through. One is our statewide telework policy, and that was put into effect in 2012. And the policy has served us quite well.
Post Irene, this was put in effect for Waterbury Complex.
It was just
When we rebuilt it.
so post Irene, and basically the policy is employees have the opportunity to request telework. And then it's at the discretion of the appointing authority based on the needs of the individual business and the functions of the employee as to whether that job is suitable for telework. And then the appointing authority can determine how much is appropriate. Prior to the pandemic, while it was used, it wasn't as popular. There wasn't kind of a telework culture. Since people who were administrative folks teleworked for, good part of 1 to 2 years, we became much more of a culture of telework. People got used to doing it. They got good at it. They liked the efficiency of it. So here we are, 4 or 5 years later, and telework is very popular. This policy is widely used. It's something that we bargained for. So if we wanted to change that, we would have to work with the VSEA to change that. But it's the same form. The employees apply, and it's basically, there's usually a conversation with the supervisor, and it's determined on whether or not we'll be able to telework and how much. It's policy 11.9 in our personnel policies. I did have, I think the committee assistant may have that, some email with the links to that if you care to look at that policy. The other piece of information I thought would be interesting for you all was every year we do an employee engagement survey. And the last survey we sent out in the spring, May or June, and we had a lot of questions on telework. So just kind of wanted to give you kind of the flavor of what we're seeing for state employees and teleworking. So first of all, with respect to the survey, we have the data by department on which departments more fill out the survey more, have a higher percentage. And it probably isn't surprising that people who have more administrative employees that are sitting at a computer for most of the workday are the ones that have a higher percentage of filling out the survey. So for example, in my department, we're administrative folks in the Department of Human Resources. We have about a 76% completion rate for the survey, where in the Department of Buildings and General Services, they have a lower percentage, about 57%. They have fewer administrative employees, more boots on the ground. You know, they have the custodial staff, they have the HVAC staff, they have their project engineers, they have their grounds staff, they have all these people that really, their jobs, or for the most time, don't warrant telework. So their security staff, you know, they're out and about, and so they're less likely to fill out a survey. So the results on telework, I've seen some reports in the paper that talk about how many employees are telework. You have to remember that any of the employees that you're mostly talking about in this committee are not teleworking. The corrections, people in the corrections facilities or in the psychiatric care facilities, that they in general, unless they're doing administrative roles, are primarily not teleworking. So going back to some of the data, and this is a kind of the executive summary portion. For respondents who have had any amount of telework or hybrid schedule, over 90% agreed that they can collaborate effectively with their colleagues while working remotely. That's 90%. And then 92.1% says remote positively affects their work-life balance. That's 90.8%. And then 82.8% agreed that remote work positively impacts their individual performance. So they think that it's a positive thing for their productivity, as well as their work-life balance, as well as being able to work well with their colleagues. The employees who were able to telework had a higher level of engagement as measured by the survey than employees who did not have the ability to telework. So when I'm talking about engagement and retention, that is really key to what we're talking about in this in this modern work culture. With the demographics in the state and the low unemployment rate, it is really, when you have employees, you want to do what you can to retain them. And telework is a tool that we have and other employers have to entice employees to continue to work in the jobs that they're trained to do. So that's one of the reasons why I think many appointed authorities and people are very supportive of their employees teleworking. So of those employees that in the survey that said they were teleworking, 16.5% were 100% telework, and 10% were less than 1%. On average, 18% did 4 days, 9.5% 3 days, 9.7% 2 days, and 3.5% 1 day. So there's a mix of people. So while 16% of the staff, of someone's staff, administrative staff, may be teleworking full time, the rest of those employees are still coming into their desks 1 day a week or 2 days a week. So we need to be conscious of that. Of course, when we're looking at space, we do need a place for employees to go when they come into work. And then, and I think then the rest are really about productivity questions. And another thing that we did this year was looking at people's responses to a question and then how engaged they were. And overall, people who were able to telework, again, had a much higher level of engagement. It was statistically, can't even say it, statistically significant that they did have a higher level of engagement. So that I think it's an important, it's just an important thing to point out. So I am a proponent of, certainly a proponent of teleworking when it makes sense, but having each department be very deliberate about how much and when. I think that's really all I wanted to say and open it up to questions.
Is engagement synonymous with productive in this model?
So this isn't measuring a productivity tool per se. I mean, different departments are going to have perhaps productivity measurements that the management's going to be looking at. So if you work in a call center, you know how many calls you're doing. So that is not, this is an engagement service. It's not measuring productivity, but engagement is a big factor in how well employees are performing their work.
Is there a compendium productivity survey for telework versus non-telework?
Well, I think that if you ask employees how productive they are, they're going to say, I don't think there's a question about productivity.
Well, yeah, well, I understand their perspective, but there's the other
Right.
perspective, the people who are paying for the
Right, but-
work to be performed.
right, but that wouldn't be the employee. That would not be, that wouldn't be in the survey where you're asking for employee, like when you're
So
asking employees. That's not a part of this survey. There's,
Is that a
Same
question
businesses.
is that a question that is asked of the?
is questions, in the survey, we asked, do you feel like you're productive? We asked supervisors as well as employees. And supervisors as well as employees did say that they found their employees productive in telework. So that was yes, and in some cases more productive. Let me see. There's a question about it. Working together, average days.
So there are hard copies of the survey that just gets out if people are interested to look at it. We'll be,
Wow. Okay. That's nice of you. That's a big print job.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
And there also is a dashboard on the website too. If you get, there's a dashboard that you can look at and filter out too, which is interesting too, if you look at the link. But yeah, there's a lot of work in the survey. But let's see, so remote work positively impacts my individual performance, 82%, 82.8% yes. This is alignment, communication, growth, supervisor score.
I'd be interested in the supervisor score.
Yeah, supervisors are, supervisors, if they didn't think their employees were productive, I mean, and that has happened, if they find that their employee is not doing as well teleworking, they wouldn't have pulled back that telework. But that's not our experience. That hasn't been our experience.
But it wasn't specifically surveyed that way. I mean, I would.
Yeah.
If the question was to any supervisor that's got 10 or
Right.
more employees, they'll work more or less productive. That would be a very helpful stat. It's probably in here.
So I'm going to,
Work all week.
yeah,
And more to
yeah, there's a lot in here,
Yeah,
so
that's
there's a lot in here. So I just wanted to let you know where you could find the data we do have, and this is about this is not just about telework, there's a section on telework, but that's in there, and it just kind of gets a taste of what our employees are feeling and how they're doing, and there's stuff that's broken down by department. We pay, agencies and departments pay a lot of attention to the results of this survey and what they can do to improve the work environment for their employees. I know you've heard, about what's going on in the Department of Corrections, and they actually survey their employees more often than this, but this is our statewide survey, and they get into more details in theirs, but.
I think we have another question, then
now,
a couple questions, and then we're gonna have to tie it because you have to go to the floor. James and then Connor.
I was just gonna say to Kevin's point, I knew the floor is more important, I think, but isn't even a survey question. I mean, it's like literally we should be able to see the data, what was production like, what's it like after? But also, unfortunately, that's not the whole picture, right? Because in today's climate, anybody who's a business owner or a manager knows it's very hard to keep employees. So they might, let's just say they're, instead of being 100%, because I don't think there's any doubt that the efficiency is actually lower at home. You can talk to people all day long. I've done it myself. It is lower. And the reason people like working at home is for other reasons other than because I'm super efficient. But you get somebody that's 97% efficient or 95, or you get 0 because they don't want to work for you anymore. So there's more than just, my point in that comment is there's more than just, are we getting every single bit of production out of somebody? Because they can go somewhere else and go, I just don't want to work here.
And, you also can see that at the workplace too, just because they're sitting at their desk, doesn't mean that they're necessarily being, as productive that they might be. I like to believe, and I do believe that one of the reasons that people choose to work in public service is they're committed to the mission. And we actually have data that shows that that's one of the things that drives employee engagement is they are committed to the work they're doing and the populations they're serving. I tend to, depending on the task, for me, working at home, I am more productive because there's not other people to talk to. And if I don't feel like writing that report and I'm in the office, I can see what everyone else is doing and I can go around, walk around and talk to people. But if I'm at home and that's really what I'm supposed to be doing, then that's what I do. So, I would say that it depends. And it is hard in some cases to measure productivity when it's not a job, when it's more knowledge work, it's how many, we're not measuring typically like how many emails people are sending out that day. Because one email, like in my HR staff, one email could take you hours to write when one email is a quick responding to be yes. So the productivity tools are different for different agencies and different departments. It's easier to measure productivity for us, like the Department of Labor, they have a call center. So how can they, they can do calls per minute and number of customers they're serving. So in some ways, it's more difficult than others to measure that.
Do you have a question, Connor?
Yeah.
Because we're gonna have to be on.
Yeah, it's gotta be pretty quick there. So like the genesis was teleworking existed before COVID, right? And obviously spiked at COVID and it's gone down in some areas, stabilized in others. Like, so strategically from the administration standpoint, the Goldilocks question, are we still moving towards bringing people back to the offices? Are we happy with the balance we have now? Or is there another direction we're going to go? And I think I asked this just because, there's no secret Montpelier feels like it's being starved by the lack of state employee traffic. And I don't think they're cash cows, I think they should do the best work-life balance and productivity. But I think we need an answer of what direction we're going.
I think that changes all the time. I would say that telework is here to stay. How much is in question and how much in each agency and department does evolve. It evolves based on sometimes even who the leader is, right? Who the leader of that department or who the leader of that division. And sometimes it's how new the people are and how well they know each other and how well they're working together separately at home or on Microsoft Teams. So it varies and it can change. And our, the telework agreements can be canceled. Like it's not you signed up for telework and that's what you're doing all the time. For me, as one of the benefits I've actually seen with respect to telework is when you allow telework, you can get people who wouldn't want to come to Montpelier every day to work, but might not mind coming once or twice a week. And that has been really helpful for us in a statewide recruiting. So we've been able to recruit since the pandemic, people who live much further away than they would normally. So usually it's, St. Johnsbury, Burlington, that's kind of the radius, but I have an employee that's like south of Rutland, I got, so I've really spread out and that helps me really, number one, get people working for the state who are in other parts of the states that might not otherwise not have that opportunity, as well as draw on that expertise that we've experienced elsewhere. So for me, having that ability and employees knowing that we do telework in this department, they can expect to not have to necessarily come in if they're doing their job well. And once they're trained every day, that's widened our ability to have Vermonters participating in government and participating in government service from way out in places where they might not normally be able to do that. So that's been for me something that I didn't expect. And that I think has been really beneficial.
Thanks, Commissioner.
So we have to close. We need to be on the floor. I'd like the committee just to come back quickly after the floor so we can talk about how we want to move forward with H50. We want to move forward with it or not, and what it would look like if we move forward with it. So let's come back here immediately after the floor.